Welcome to the Equip Podcast. Here you'll find conversations from people of all different walks of life, sharing their experiences, the things the Lord has taught them, and things to equip you. Equip is based on Ephesians 4:11-13 that talks about equipping God's people for works of service so that the body of Christ may be built up. That is our goal here, to build you up and equip you through seasons of ups and downs in life. Welcome back to the Equip Podcast. I'm your host, Taylor Gibson, and today I'm joined by Whitney Briggs. Whitney is a licensed professional counselor joining us to share about in-laws. This is going to be a two-part series. Part one with Whitney sharing about boundary setting and communication. And then the second part, we will hear from a mother and daughter-in-law. We're in our Speak Life series, which is a series based on Ephesians 4:29. It says, "Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear." I'm so excited for today's episode and hope that will be helpful to you. Welcome, Whitney.
Thank you.
Well, we will dive right in. How do you communicate your frustrations, heartache, hurt, concern, etc. about your spouse's parents, especially as it relates to setting boundaries and getting on the same page?
Yeah. So when I thought about this and thought about this topic, the first place to start in my mind is just setting the stage for how weird this relationship is. Because you build your relationship with your spouse, you build a friendship, you take time, you ask questions. And then, as you progress, you contemplate what it means to become family with your spouse. And then all of a sudden, all these other people are just your family too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think part of it is figuring out with your in-laws, and I know we'll kind of get into some of this, but with your in-laws, learning where their expectations come from, learning who they are as people, taking the time, sort of to date them, to get to know them, rather than just stepping into, oh, good, we're family now, with no history and no understanding. And so I think the first and maybe most important, answer to this question is, if I'm going to communicate my frustrations, my heartache, a huge part of those expectations come from my own experiences, my own family, the lessons I learned, the expectations I have based on what I saw from a mom, from a dad, from siblings. So when I go to my spouse, it's great to communicate, hey, here's where this come from, but really understanding that the gap, your frustrations come from the gap between your experiences are not their experiences. So asking questions and trying to understand, what have they been through? Where do they come from? What is their story? What has life taught them? Who have they seen? What did they like and not like? Allows you to build a relationship, through your spouse and getting to understand their perspective, but also with your in-laws. And last part on this, but my father-in-law can be very quiet. He's the nicest person that walks the planet. I really feel that way. But he can be very quiet. But if you ask him, if you talk to him, if you, feel like, hey, tell me about this, he'll go on and on and on. And so it's just taking the time and trying to figure out, who are you? What's your story? What has life taught you? And then from there with your spouse, and, I'm sure we'll get into more of this too, but trying to figure out how to fill in those gaps. So yeah, I think just seeking understanding and realizing that your own disappointment and frustrations comes from a difference in life, a difference in experience. So then you have to resolve what to do with that. And I think that most of that is going to happen with your spouse. How do you and your spouse want to take your different stories, your different experiences, and start to create your own life?
It's really good. And I think that's such a helpful perspective. The next thing I wanted to ask was, how do you know when an issue is worth addressing? I remember growing up as a kid, I would freak out about these small things. And my mom would be like, you are turning a molehill into a mountain and you need to just calm down.
It's a beautiful mountain.
So at what point do you figure out this is worth addressing? And then how do you do that respectfully?
My gut answer is always. And I think to your point of mountain out of a molehill, it's figuring out how to address it in an appropriate way for what it is. Now, I think that what's most important to say here before I get started is I understand every personality is different. I'm a very bold personality. And confrontation doesn't really scare me. Now, I think that I've grown into that because I believe that confrontation should be productive. So if we're going to talk to people about issues, our minds should be, I want to resolve this with you. I want forgiveness. So that's where I'm going to start is the definition of forgiveness. And I heard this definition along the way somewhere. I really don't remember where, but I loved it. And somebody told me, they're like, I can forgive somebody or I can treat somebody like what they did never happened, given the assurance it'll never happen again. And I think some of that, when you talk about boundaries and when you talk about in-laws and you talk about all these differences, when we address issues, our goal should be to communicate, to understand, to try to come up with a solution where it's like, hey, I don't want to hurt you again. Like, I don't want to hurt you and I don't want to be hurt by you. Can we talk about it? So the truth is that some of our families are not healthy. We can't do that. And, you know, some people will listen to this and be like, okay, well, that's a good idea, but these people are nuts, you know, and they might be, I don't know. So I think at the end of the day, your question should be, do I address this with my in-laws directly, or do I address this with my spouse and sort of determine where we lay boundaries, how we lay boundaries? So, you know, have I understood why the issue is happening and really gotten to the heart of how do we not hurt each other in the future? So I think in a best case scenario, you could sit down with your in-laws and be like, hey, I don't like that we feel this way. You know, can we talk about this? Can you help me understand what you need, where you're coming from, where you saw yourself, you know, whatever. And can we figure out how to do this better? If that's not possible, which I completely understand, whether that's personality or just unhealthy circumstances or whatever, I think that's something that you and your spouse have to get really good at and saying, hey, how do we present as a united front? How do we resolve this? And just kind of create, you know, the first question it asked about boundaries. I think a boundary is sort of a line that keeps you safe, right? So if I think about my 1-year-old, I'm not going to let her out in the front yard unattended because that's not safe. No. So I don't have the ability to say to her, you can go to the curb and no further. Yeah. She would not listen. She would run into the street and play. And
she probably doesn't even really know what a curb is.
She would find some sort of toy and it would just be bad. And so that's not to limit her. It's not to make her feel powerless or controlled. It's to keep her safe. So I think when you look at your boundaries with your spouse, your in-laws, your family, your kids, our question should be, what keeps me safe? What keeps this happy? What keeps this well? So as we talk about boundaries through this and we talk about forgiveness, I think our heart and our mindset really should be focused on, man, how do we make this where I can treat you like none of these harms ever happened? I want to look at you and find joyfulness. So if I have to set fences with my spouse or with you or whoever, really, it's, well, within this fence, I can be joyful. I can look at you and enjoy you, even in hard relationships. Outside of this, I harbor resentment. Outside of this, I continue to get hurt, and that's just not worth it. Yeah. So it's kind of,
That's good. And just, I love the being able to openly communicate, which I feel like a lot of this will come from not maybe addressing something as soon as it's happening and you're in the moment. Like maybe give yourself a breath so that your motivation comes from a pure and helpful place versus I'm really mad at you. I need you to just stop. Yeah.
I'm like a 48-hour processor, whether or not that's a good thing. If I'm really upset, like I would rather go back to my spouse or family. I mean, I argue with my parents probably more than I do my in-laws because I have my whole life. I'm so comfortable with it, you know? But in order to really solve the problem, sometimes I have to come out of my emotions, like you're saying. And so when part of the answer to that is a good point is, when is it worth addressing? Well, when I'm calm enough to be able to say, hey, here's why I'm really mad. And here's what I need from you. Can you talk to me about that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, and also I think being open to, what do you need from me?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, how do you respond to rude, passive-aggressive comments or behaviors when the in-law doesn't see anything wrong with it or maybe doesn't realize they're doing it? Or even we'll add manipulative in there. Just like that.
Yeah, exactly. I just make a barf sound. these are really hard. And I think, even thinking about this, my first note to myself was, oh man, it's just rough circumstances. So I think acknowledging the truth of what something is, right? I go back to forgiveness once again. I can treat you like what you did never happened when I get an assurance it'll never happen again. So if you won't assure me, well, then out of protection, one, for the relationship, because I want to treat you with joyfulness in my heart, I'm going to build a fence, right? And I have to figure out how to allow you in, or how to absorb what you're saying in a way, or not absorb what you're saying in a way where I can treat you like what you did never happened out of joyfulness. So I think that's a good place for a boundary. I think as far as like skill building, there's things in our brain that try to relate with people, and we mirror the nonverbals. So there's kind of this funny little rule, like strongest party wins, right? If you're being passive aggressive and I'm not actively trying to just keep my cool, or whatever, then I'm going to join you. And that might be 15 minutes later when I get in my car and I'm fuming. But if I can just sort of keep my wits about myself, whether that's through prayer or scripture or just taking deep breaths, I think there's a million ways to be like, you know what? I'm not going to act this way. Like, I'm not going to join them. And I think that's a really healthy boundary that is hard. Because I am an expressive, big emotions person. And so if you make me mad, my mad goes to 10. That's just true. Maybe not to 10, but I can get mad quickly. So just remembering to take a breath and really sink into your own character, your own core values. And I go back a lot of times to the verse in Colossians. I don't have it in front of me, so I'm not going to quote the whole thing, but it's Colossians 3. Put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another and forgiving each other as Christ has forgiven you. And I think we're not going to remember that all of the time, but I think trying to really hold on to who God has made us and act out of that. We can't control other people, but we can control ourselves, and we can determine how we are going to engage. So just anchor into who God has made you, who God is making you, and take a deep breath. And if they don't feel the same, don't believe the same, won't act the same, in simple terms, build a fence, protect yourself, and then find where that line should be so that you can treat them with joyfulness. Last point on that is talk with your spouse about this. Ask them, how did they deal with it growing up? How do they deal with it as an adult? You are new to this relationship.
Well, and do they even recognize it? Sometimes you may not even recognize it's happening if you've grown up with that your whole life.
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you see... And, depending on how it works, like, is there a way they can advocate for you? Like, thinking about my parents are strong personalities and they're awesome. If my husband went to them and was like, hey, stop this, or I don't like it, they would totally listen to him, but he doesn't feel comfortable. So there's absolutely times where I've been like, you can go tell them, whatever, whether it's, I don't want dessert, leave me alone, or whatever. And he has to grow into that just like I do with his family. And so sometimes I can go advocate for him and be like, Dad, leave him alone, or Mom, leave him alone. And they know that it's a molehill, not a mountain. They know that it's small. So he's sort of, both of us with each other's parents are growing into being able to communicate. And then, like you said, trying to understand, do you see this way? Am I wrong? Whatever you need to understand. So,
and the cool thing about this conversation, you and I are both daughter-in-laws. We are not mother-in-laws, so have a long ways till we will be. But I feel like even in this conversation, it goes both ways. This could even apply to a mother-in-law or a parent-in-law, whatever, dealing with a child-in-law.
Yes.
It is not just like a one-sided argument.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally.
So that's helpful.
Yeah, these are that's the, when we started out with this as a weird relationship, that's what it is. It's it's a friendship where the expectations are all of a sudden the highest level of intimacy. Family is one of the highest levels of intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
They're who we build the bulk of our memories with, both good and bad. I mean, our family, my parents really set the stage for how I see myself, how I see the world, how I see family. So all of a sudden, for these people to come into your life and they're like, so this is how family goes. You're like, oh no,
That's
it's
very different.
Yeah. And my sister, she's going to kill me if she listens to this, but my sister in their like first or second year of marriage started walking around, and when her husband would do things that weren't the same, she'd walk around their house and go, it's not wrong, it's just different. And I thought it was so funny because
it feels wrong, but that's such a good perspective. It's not wrong.
It's not wrong. It's just different.
Yeah.
And that's how so much of the issues with in-laws, you're right, both directions, for somebody to come in and do something different in the intimacy of your home, in the intimacy of your space or theirs, it can feel just so hurtful. And they didn't do anything wrong. So discussing that and trying to figure out what do we do to make us family when that's a relationship that has to grow. I have 30-something years. I don't know how old I am. 30-something years with my family. I have 3.5 with Brad's. So it's new. But yeah.
That's good. Well, as we are talking about how this is both sided, I do want to shift gears to what do you do when a mother-in-law feels protective or jealous of their child, which is now your spouse?
Yeah.
How do you address that?
I love my mother-in-law because when we first got married, she told me, she was like, just so you know, like, he's my baby, you know, something like that. And I was like, okay. So I think, and my grandma actually told me this well. She said, Whitney, you need to be nice to that lady, as if I wouldn't be. But she said, I have 4 boys and it's different. And she said, you need to understand that, and you need to try to invite her in because boys are not good at that. And I appreciated sort of both of their perspectives. So I think my answer is start with grace. Brad's mom, every mom played the significant female role in his life until he chose to change it. So first and foremost, you need to understand that like this woman theoretically loves him, right? And has sacrificed a huge part of her life to make sure that he is safe and well. So when you come in, don't come in all high and mighty thinking like this is your show. Now it is your show, right? I do believe that you and him get to build this household. But don't come in and pull the rug out from under her feet and then ask her why she's mad that she fell. Like, that's not kind.
Fair point.
So I think starting with grace and respecting the relationship that they have had, but first and foremost, the sacrifices that she's made to support him until the day you met him and until you earned the right to his respect and you earned the right to like partnership level voice in his life. So I know that's not true of every mother, but if your mother-in-law is healthy but grieving the loss of this role, be gracious. So at least in your heart. And I think with that, don't expect change to happen faster than it should. For anyone listening to this who is a mother, you know that it can be really easy to lose yourself in the identity of mom, like the role we play as mom, because I have she's like 1.5. I don't know how many months. Counting is hard. But everything I do has to be focused on her because she's just constantly trying to hurt herself, right? And so when I think about taking care of myself or taking a shower or, you know, fixing my hair or doing what I want, sometimes that has to go by the wayside for her welfare, or maybe even just going outside and taking a deep breath. It's like her needs come first. So I think sometimes it's hard to remember as women in general, no matter what stage you're in, that your identity is not wrapped up in one thing. So if you as a woman are wrapping your identity up fully in being a mom, I highly encourage you to diversify that so that when you're a mother-in-law, you don't lose yourself, right? So that when your kid goes off and get married, you can be joyful because you're not losing yourself because you're so codependent with that tiny human. It's, man, I have all these parts of me and I might grieve a little bit for this one part as it goes, but I can find so much joy that they're with this amazing, safe person because I didn't lose too much of myself. So I think going back, there's a spectrum of healthy and unhealthy here. And I think that's important to say. So, you know, some mother-in-laws, some moms, they're going to be codependent. And while you can be sensitive, you can set boundaries. And, you know, we'll kind of get into some of those things, but there is a shift happening for her and for you. If she looked at you and said, where do I fit in y'all's world? I mean, depending on when, if my mother-in-law would have asked me that, depending on when, I would have been like, I don't know, you know, like, let me think about it. That's a good question. And so if you don't know where she fits in this life you're so excited to build, how in the world is she supposed to? And so just allowing for that to take place where it's like, hey, here's what I do want from you. Here's where I do want you. Here's the relationship I do want you and him to have. And here's the relationship I want to have with you too. Allow that some space to change and recognize that there's change happening. So, you know, I think it's just communicating. I think, let me think okay. Well, I made a note of this story. Hopefully he doesn't kill me for sharing this story. But when we moved to Tyler, we just had a few hard months. And he was going through some things and I was going through some things. And I feel like there was just a lot of stress going around. So fast forward like a year later, he and I were talking and
he is in Brad, your husband?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you. Me and Brad were talking and he was telling me about just some realizations he had and we were kind of going back and forth and there were some things he shared with me where he was talking about like just how stress had sort of taken over the way he saw our relationship and things like that. I'm trying to keep it short. But he had shared those with his mom and I was like, first of all, I don't care. Like his mom is a safe place to process and I love that. That's really good. But I was like, you better go tell her that you figured out like that you unraveled some of these things and that you realized like I wasn't attempting to be hurtful, but you know, stress was sort of infiltrating when you saw this because I think it's important for him to go advocate. Like she is protective of him. She should be protective of him. She's his mom. And if I'm somebody that is hurting him or he feels hurt by me, like I'm a mom. I can understand a little mama bear coming out and being like, I'm here for my kid, you know? And so I think in situations like that, if you process with your parents or talk to your parents, knowing if your in-laws choose their side, like my parents, you know, might choose my side or whatever, like it's your responsibility to close the loop on things and talk with them. Not that it's not your in-laws' responsibility to be everyone's team. And my in-laws are my team and my parents are our team. But I hope that makes sense. I'm trying to protect a little bit of that story. But, you know, just making sure that you follow up with your own parents if you process with them so that they know you love each other and that you're safe. Because your parents have spent your lifetime trying to keep you safe.
And I think the idea of closing the loop on any kind of processing is helpful no matter who you're talking to. You're talking to your friends, your siblings, parents, whatever. Like you owe that to your spouse to close the loop.
Absolutely. I think the last thing I was thinking on this is just be kind, be gracious, but be clear. If you want to talk to your in-laws about, you know, if you have an in-law that's feeling jealous of this person, be clear about where they fit. Be kind about this process, but talk about it. Now, again, I'm a bold personality that's not scared of confrontation. So I have to recognize that. And knowing that we're sitting here probably talking to people who do not all function like me, one of the things I would encourage you to do if you find yourself being more afraid or more passive is realize that the goal and the heart would be to heal and to learn and to grow with one another. And it's okay. God sets boundaries, right? It's okay to set a boundary because ultimately it just sort of keeps safe and protected what should be safe and protected. At the end of the day, no matter how your mother-in-law feels, whether it's an identity crisis she's having because she's losing sort of this primary role, or if it's just grief of a shift in seasons, or if she's codependent, you know, I mean, there's such a spectrum. I'm sure there's a million other things people are thinking that could fill in those blanks, but they need to be your team, right? You're either going to be or are married, and talking to them about how you need their support for your marriage to thrive, I think is important.
Yeah,
So.
That's good. Well, I want to shift gears a little bit to the conversation of kids/grandkids. How do you set boundaries and expectations on their time with your child?
Their time with your child. Well, first and foremost, it's your kid. Now, the weird part of that, I'll say this, like a couple of weeks after Birdie was born, I think my mom was the one who asked me, she was like, you know, do you feel like a mom? And I was like, no, I've been a mom for 2 weeks. Like, I feel like a more tired version of who I was 2 weeks ago, you know? And it's an adjustment for yourself. So I think what happens when you become a parent is everybody starts telling you stuff and they start telling you the excitement of what they want to do. My parents did this. Brad's parents did this. You know, oh, we're going to take him to do this. And we can't wait to have him to do this. And you're sitting there. You haven't slept in 2 weeks. And you're like, okay, well, they can't actually play in sand because they'll choke on it. You know, they're tiny. And it's just all so hard to wrap your head around. So just remember, like, you are going to get so much advice or so many, your in-laws, your parents are allowed to be excited. Like, don't ruin their joy for them either. Or at least try not to, right? And so when I think at one point, I can't remember if Birdie was born or not, but my mother-in-law was like, we're going to take her on a cross-country road trip to every national park. And I was like, okay, like, you know, like I can't wrap my mind around that yet, but it's not wrong for her to be joyful. So,
well, you don't have to shoot down their dreams. Like, it may not happen. Like, I have this thing where I'm like, somebody says an idea and I'm like, no, that's dumb. We're not doing that. And then realizing maybe it was just an idea or a dream and not something that we're actually like putting into reality tomorrow or even ever.
Right. But if you want to dream it today, we're not going to cross this bridge for at least like 5 to 8 years. Like, I mean, we have some time. So like, just let them have joy. Because when the kid's 8, you're probably going to want to get rid of them for a cross-country road trip. You're going to be like, bye, you know. But you get the opportunity to grow in comfort. And so if it's things like how much you feed them or when they sleep or what shots they get or where they're born, you know, it's your kid. It's your life. Settle into how you feel. Communicate that with your spouse first and foremost. And then you and your spouse communicate with your parents and talk to each other about it. About how you as a family envision your life. And then decide who wants to tell what parent. And you know what? If they don't respect it, they don't have to. I think you are responsible for how you communicate. You are not responsible for how other people necessarily feel. I mean, you want to take accountability if you're being a jerk, but don't be a jerk, you know, right? Like, go back to what nature do I need to put on and how can I communicate that and allow other people to settle into the decisions we make. I'm going to make mistakes. Like, that's okay. Our parents made mistakes. We get the right to make those mistakes and learn at the pace we choose to learn and how we choose to learn. So I think we should be teachable, but you also just get inundated with people's opinions. So you don't have to receive their opinion to, you know, for it to all be okay. I'm not going to appease somebody if I don't think it's really in the best interest of my kid. And then I think the other thing is like, with in-laws, as much as you don't ruin their joy and stuff like that, with time with them or whatever, make sure that as much as you're communicating what you're not going to do or what they can't do or when they can't have your kid, if it's safe and healthy for your child to be there, which is important to say because not every environment is, then communicate what they can do. Talk to them about what you do want to see and what would be joyful for you to see. Celebrate. And this is true for all parents. I think by nature, we feel, I'm going to say the most knowledge of our own parents, because I'm not going to say the most comfort. Not every family is comforting. But we sort of know the ins and outs of, if I hand over my 2-year-old, what is going to happen to her when she goes to this house? Well, with my parents, I know they're going to feed her sugar that I told them not to feed her. Like, absolutely. My mom the other day was feeding her Teddy Grahams. I know she's not supposed to have these, but she loves them. I'm not kidding. She's going to listen to this. Yes, I did. Like, she gave my nephew 2 popsicles at one time. And she was like, but he's sick and it's special. My sister was like, Mom, you know. And so it's like, at least with our mom, we know what's coming. And we know the amount of confidence she has when she breaks the rules. And so we know what we're dealing with. But with in-laws, it's a little different. You know, if I looked at my mother-in-law and was like, oh, don't give her popsicles, I would probably hurt her feelings a lot more, because we don't have 30 years of small exchanges like that where my mom's not going to get her feelings hurt. There's just so much more knowledge there. So I'm going to have to go about that a different way, or be like, okay, only half, maybe one more bite, you know, whatever. Doesn't mean I can't still be clear, and I can't say, here's what does make me happy. Here's what I can do. Here's where I can be flexible. And I remember telling my in-laws early on too, I was like, I need you to give me the time to learn. Cause I was really rigid at the beginning, mostly because everything felt so chaotic. I needed the rigid because it was just a lot to adapt to. So at one point, I think it was them, it may have been my parents, but I was just like, look, I know I have kind of a tight schedule. I was like, right now, I need that for me. And I need you guys to respect it, because I feel so overwhelmed that having this type of schedule helps me get through the day. I'm not trying to limit anybody else. Just give me a minute. And once I settle in, I promise I'm not going to be this structured. I just need a minute to kind of get my feet back on the ground. So letting them know what they can do. And then last thing on this, but talk with your spouse as much as you can, as early as you can. We did a premarital counseling book. But at the end of it, Brad goes, oh, I'm so glad we're done with that. Because it was hours and hours and hours of conversation. But we've both agreed that it was worth all of those hours, because, and he hates talking through, like, okay, theoretically, you know, I love that stuff. I could and did talk for hours about it. He hates it. And well, he was a champ. But when we got to the end, we started to hit some of those scenarios, and we had at least opened the door. You know, what would we do if my mom wants to stay for 3 months, which she didn't, you know, but some parents do. We have a friend whose mom did stay for 3 months, and both of us were like, whoa. And our friends were like, this is great, you know? And so having conversations to say, hey, what would you think about this? Or what could this be like, as early as possible? You know, then if your mom or your mother-in-law, either one, if one of the adults that has buy-in, because our parents have buy-in into our kids' lives, says, okay, well, we want to take the baby. You know, you guys already have a foundation to be like, hey, how do we feel about this? Am I comfortable? Who should tackle communicating what we feel to this person? And you're not fighting about it before, you know, either in front, hopefully not in front of them, but you can discuss it.
And you're not, like, you're in a peaceful place that you've addressed it. Like, I'm thinking right after you have a baby and your hormones are crazy and your body's doing weird things, like, you're not trying to figure it out in that moment.
You can't.
It's not helpful.
No, when Birdie was 6 months old, Brad looked at me and he goes, I mean, we really don't fight. We discuss, we we'll talk through things. We'll talk through things for hours in premarital, and then he never wants to do it again. But we really don't like bicker a lot or anything. And like 6 months into her life, he was like, why are we bickering so much? And I looked at him and started crying, and I was like, because we don't sleep anymore. And he was like, that makes a lot of sense, you know? Because yeah, your head's just not screwed on straight. And that's okay.
It's just a season.
It is. The day she turned, I don't know what it was, but the day she turned a year old, I was like, I think we're okay.
We survived.
Like, oh my gosh. Like, we slept a full night once. And, you know, all these people who are like, my baby slept through the night by this. I'm like, oh, I need whatever you use, send it over. Because my baby, like, she woke up 3 times last night. Yeah, it's fine. But you do hit this point where things get better. You get more sleep. You feel more sanity. So to your point, yeah, talk about these things before as much as you can imagine and think of, or Google. I mean, Google's an amazing resource. You can Google any thought you have. If you Google questions I should ask my spouse before our first child is born, I bet
literally
Google has something for you. If not, I'll plug it. There's a resource. It's a marriage and premarital book put out by the Austin Stone, which is a church in Austin. And if you go to austinstone.org/marriage, I'm pretty sure is what it is. Best of luck.
I can link it in the show notes.
We can link it.
I'll do the digging for you.
Good. They have a marriage and premarital workbook, and it's amazing. It has Bible studies you can do with your spouse. It has questions for budgeting, parenting, in-laws, sex, your relationship, your personal history, where, you know, it's hours worth of conversation to get to know what your spouse thinks and to get on the same page. So that in these moments when your in-laws are like, and we're going to take your 3-month-old across the country, you know, and you're like, what?
No.
Your spouse can just gently tap you on the shoulder and be like, go take a nap. I'll take care of this. Because you feel like a team. You have each other's back.
Well, and that's the important thing, I think, is you are a team. So remembering at the end of the day, you still got to be a team. So how do you make that work for you? A couple questions as we wrap up. This could relate to when a grandchild comes into the picture, or could relate to any situation. But what is the best way to handle situations of jealousy between different sides of the family? So, for example, your parents and Brad's parents, like if there was jealousy there, how do you handle that?
Well, I think on some level it goes back to letting, first of all, depending on the health of each side and whatever, I don't think you have to be fair, because I don't think everybody gets a trophy, but I do think you have to be clear, right? I mean, you can't say be fair because every situation is so different, but also don't shove people out either. I think as women and men and mothers and daughters and whoever, you have a responsibility to be aware of what you are doing. I think it's important for you to sort of take a check of yourself and be like, well, am I pushing them away? Am I offering as much? Why am I doing that? Have I not forgiven some things? And so I'm just avoiding them by, pushing them out. Like, well, that is not putting on compassionate hearts and kindness and humility and meekness and patience and forgiving others as Christ forgave you, right? And so when we go to people and say, hey, I have this beef with you, and I've been avoiding you because I have this beef with you, can we talk about it? A really simple way. I'm a big emotion person, so I have to bring myself down in order to be productive. I know that. And so in short moments, if I feel my emotions fire up, my number one go-to is I have to use the bathroom. And I'll just go and I will sit by myself for a second and be like, why am I mad? And what do I need? Why am I mad? And what do I need?
That's really good.
And so my sort of take is, if I haven't thought through that and then communicated that with them, I haven't given them the opportunity to make amends with me. Because if I looked at them and said, why am I mad? I don't even know why I'm mad yet. That's not fair. They have no They could guess 400 things and 399 are wrong. I don't even know the right one.
Mm-hmm.
So, to really answer your question, I think when you talk about jealousy between, first of all, make sure there's no resentments on your side.
That's good.
Where you're holding weird lines, weird ways. I think the second is just communicating with your families what you do want from them, the experiences you do want to have. We've even talked to both sides and different experiences about weird things we saw them doing. Like, hey, it feels like you're avoiding us, or it feels like this, and let's talk about it. Again, I know I'm a bold personality and I don't like tension. So I like to go in
and get it out.
Yeah, figure it out.
That's really good. Well, the last thing I wanted to ask is more for the step parent in-law, mother or father-in-law. What do you do if you don't approve of the person your child is dating or marrying?
Well, there's sort of an easy and a hard answer to this. The hard answer, well, there might even be the same. The answer is that this happens along the way. You don't earn the right or the respect of your child's, your child doesn't necessarily respect your opinion unless you have earned it all along the way. And so there were plenty of people, I can think of 3 specifically, that I either dated or was interested in along the way in my life. And I remember with all 3 of them, one of my parents looked at me and they go, hey, my dad one time, we were sitting in my driveway. He goes, hey, that's not it. And I was like, dang it. And it wasn't even so much that I liked him. I have so much respect for my parents that if they saw that, it was over. But my parents earned that. Not that they're perfect. They're not perfect, but they earned that right for everything they ever did and all the ways that they showed me. I know they love me. And for better or for worse, in some moments in my life, I knew they wanted the best for me. So all they had to say was, hey, And I was like, shoot, then that's not the best, So I think if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, well, I've messed up or this or that, like, start today. Well, what does it take to earn right? I mean, I think people just want acceptance of who they are, not who you want them to be. I think they want admiration and love of who they are, notice who they are, talk to them about who they are. If you want them to date somebody worthy of them, well, then they have to have a good self-concept. So we should be building that up and letting them know what they deserve and what they're worthy of. And if you're a person who's like, well, no one ever gave me that, talk to somebody about it. So this is the last thing I'll say on that. There was this research study done. I can't tell you where because I read it one time, should have saved it, didn't, and then it's off it goes. But it was talking about, specifically about violence within households. But one of the sort of figures that it came out with was that there's a 670% likelihood that the children in a household where violence is present will have violence in their household in the future. And so in the conclusion, they were talking about, part of that significance, it really comes down to the fact that our household gives us the most intimate knowledge of what happens in a household. So when we go and we have our own household and we're thinking in our minds, what should happen here? And all of this happens subconsciously. We don't actively think these things sometimes, but we try to play out what should this look like? Well, we're going to replicate what we saw. And so, I'm not saying that, like, if you take the idea of violence out of it, I think the last point I want to say here is just that how you run your household is what your kids are going to look for. It's what they're going to partner with. It's how they're going to run their household. And so if you want voice in their life, earn it. And I think if you want them to be in a safe, healthy, beautiful, meaningful relationship, if you're not in that yourself and you want that for them, get support. Get help. These things can change. The other part of that study is that the likelihood of those children entering into a dangerous situation goes to 3% if they're able to find a new example of a healthy model that they can replicate instead. So, there's not an easy answer. If you don't like who they're with right now, I mean, absolutely try to talk to them about it. I think, on some level, that's your job as a parent.
Yeah.
But if you're sort of forward looking at this, if you need help in your own relationship, there's help out there in churches and counseling centers, maybe even among friends or family. But there's help available to you. And so whether it's small cleanup changes you need to make or big, and then the other is just build relationship with your kids. They are their own human. They are not the human you want them to be. And so helping them see themselves the way God sees them. God made them. He made them individually, and helping them understand who he intended that to be, like them as a person, ultimately gets them to, well, then who should you partner with to do the coolest things in life?
And that's good. Well, Whitney, this has been full of so much good and helpful information. Thank you. Before you go, we've got 2 questions we ask every guest. What are you loving and what are you learning?
I kind of laugh because I feel like I'm not learning anything. I have, between 1 and 2-year-old, and she takes all my time. But I have been listening. I started a business a few months ago, and I've been listening to this podcast about how to start businesses. So that's been really cool. It's a podcast by Kate Walker. It's mostly about starting counseling businesses, but it's still been really fun. So that's kind of what I've been learning, in the little time that I have. But what I've been loving, honestly, I have been putting on music in the morning while we make breakfast. And then my child takes everything out of every cabinet that I own, and it's like the most lovely peace in the chaos, because it's like dark outside, it's the morning, and it just makes everything better. So if you have to wake up before 7 a.m., which some people choose to, I do not choose to, I have to. Some people are like, I love 5 a.m. Well, you can come on over anytime you want. But it just makes the mornings peaceful and restful and happy. So add something happy to whatever part of your day is hard.
I love it. Whitney, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Equip Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to be the first to know when a new episode drops. And follow us on social media to stay connected. We're at GABC_women. See you next time.